The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the weathered building marked Helena General Store, and Fiona Ellis pressed her trembling hand against her hollow stomach, knowing that the sharp angles of her body would likely disappoint the man waiting to meet his mail-order bride. She had written honestly in her letters about her circumstances, but seeing the judgment in people's eyes when they looked at her gaunt frame had taught her that honesty on paper rarely prepared anyone for the reality of a woman who had known too much hunger for too many years. Helena, Montana stretched before her in the afternoon light of June 1882. A town carved from wilderness and determination, where false-fronted buildings lined dirt streets and the promise of silver in the nearby mountains had drawn men seeking fortune. Fiona stepped down from the coach on unsteady legs, her simple gray dress hanging loose on her thin frame, and immediately felt the eyes of curious onlookers assessing her. She stood 5 feet and 6 inches tall, which made her thinness even more pronounced, and her auburn hair, though clean and pinned neatly beneath her worn bonnet, could not distract from the sharp lines of her cheekbones and the way her collarbone jutted prominently above the neckline of her dress. "Miss Ellis." The voice came from behind her, deep and careful, and when Fiona turned, she found herself looking up into the weathered face of a man who stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to block the sun. Warren Northwood removed his hat, revealing dark brown hair touched with early gray at the temples despite his apparent age of perhaps 35 years, and his blue eyes studied her with an expression she could not quite read. "Mr. Northwood," Fiona said softly, and she watched his gaze travel over her, saw the moment when he registered just how thin she truly was, and braced herself for the rejection she had faced before. 3 years earlier, she had answered an advertisement from a merchant in Ohio, only to have him take one look at her and declare that he needed a wife with enough meat on her bones to bear healthy children and handle hard work. The humiliation had burned then, but the years since had only made her thinner as she scraped by on factory wages in New York City that barely covered rent in a boarding house, let alone adequate meals. When Warren Northwood's advertisement had appeared in the matrimonial newspaper, describing his ranch outside Helena and his need for a practical woman willing to face frontier life, Fiona had written with more hope than confidence, explaining that while she lacked curves, she possessed determination and a willingness to work harder than most. Warren's eyes moved to her face and something shifted in his expression. "You have had a long journey," he said quietly. "You must be hungry." The kindness in his tone made Fiona's throat tighten. "I am well enough, Mr. Northwood. I do not require much." "That may be," he replied, settling his hat back on his head. "But you are in Montana now, and winter here demands strength that your body does not currently possess. Before we discuss anything else, you will eat a proper meal and then we will talk." He collected her single worn carpetbag from the stagecoach driver, paid the man, and then gestured toward the hotel across the street. Fiona followed, acutely aware of how her boots, resoled twice in New York, scuffed against the wooden boardwalk, and how the other women on the street, even those clearly working as saloon girls, seemed to possess more substance than her own frame could claim. The hotel dining room smelled of roasted meat and fresh bread, and Fiona's stomach clenched painfully at the aroma. Warren guided her to a corner table, held her chair with the manners of a man raised properly, and then sat across from her, studying her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. "When did you last have a full meal?" he asked. Fiona considered lying, then decided against it. 2 days ago. A woman on the train shared her bread and cheese." Warren's jaw tightened, and he signaled the waitress, a plump woman in her 50s who came bustling over with a smile that faded when she saw Fiona. Warren Northwood, what have you done, bringing this poor creature here looking half-starved? I have done nothing yet, Mrs. Patterson, which is why I need your help. Bring us roast beef, potatoes, vegetables, bread, butter, and whatever pie you have today. Coffee and milk as well, Mrs. Patterson's expression softened. Right away, and I will make the portions generous. When the woman hurried toward the kitchen, Warren leaned back in his chair, his hands resting flat on the table. Miss Ellis, I will speak plainly because I believe you value honesty. You wrote in your letters that you were thin, but I did not understand the extent of your situation. You are not simply slender, you are severely undernourished, and that concerns me greatly. Fiona lifted her chin. I can work, Mr. Northwood. I may not look strong, but I have been supporting myself in New York for 3 years, working 14 hours a day in a garment factory. I do not shirk labor, and I do not complain. I do not doubt your willingness, Warren said, and his voice held no judgment, only a careful consideration that Fiona found more unsettling than outright rejection would have been. But willingness alone will not sustain you through a Montana winter. The cold here is brutal, Miss Ellis. The ranch is 8 miles from town, and when the snows come, we can be isolated for weeks at a time. The work is hard, endless, and demanding. I need to know that you can survive it, and right now, I fear a strong wind might blow you away. Then why did you agree to my coming here? Fiona asked, and she heard the edge in her own voice, the defensiveness born of too many disappointments. Warren met her eyes steadily. Because your letters showed intelligence, courage, and a spirit that appealed to me more than any physical description could. I am not a man who values appearance over character, Miss Ellis. I have lived alone on my ranch for 7 years since my father died and my mother went to live with my sister in California. I want a partner, not an ornament. But I also need that partner to be healthy enough to share the life I offer, and I am asking you to let me help you achieve that health. Mrs. Patterson arrived with plates laden with food, and the sight of so much abundance made Fiona's eyes burn with unexpected tears. The roast beef, sliced thick and swimming in rich gravy, sat beside mounds of mashed potatoes, carrots, and green beans glistening with butter. A basket of bread, still warm from the oven, appeared next to a crock of golden butter, and the coffee smelled like heaven itself. Eat slowly, Warren advised as Mrs. Patterson poured their coffee. Your stomach will not be accustomed to this much food, and I would rather you keep it down than make yourself sick. Fiona nodded, cutting a small piece of beef and bringing it to her mouth. The flavor exploded across her tongue, rich and savory, and so good that she had to close her eyes for a moment. She forced herself to chew slowly, to savor it, and when she swallowed, the warmth of the food seemed to spread through her entire body. Warren ate his own meal steadily, not watching her with the pity she had feared, but also glancing up occasionally to ensure she was managing. Fiona worked her way through the beef and potatoes, eating until her shrunken stomach protested, and then she sat back, breathing carefully. That is good, Warren said. Finish your coffee and rest for a moment, then, if you are able, try some bread. Mrs. Patterson bakes the finest bread in Montana. Mr. Northwood, Fiona began, but he raised his hand. Warren, if we are to be married, formality seems unnecessary. Warren, Fiona corrected, and the name felt strange on her tongue. I must ask what you intend. Do you wish to send me back to New York? I will not blame you if you do, but I need to know. Warren set down his coffee cup, and his blue eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. I intend to marry you, Miss Ellis, if you are willing, but I will not do so under false pretenses. You need time to regain your strength, to eat properly, and to adjust to life here. I propose that you stay in town, at this hotel, for the next 2 weeks. I will cover all expenses, including your meals. You will eat 3 full meals every day and you will rest. After 2 weeks, if you still wish to proceed with our arrangement, we will marry and you will come to the ranch. There, I promise you, I will continue to feed you properly, and I will do everything in my power to ensure that you never know hunger again. The words hung in the air between them, and Fiona felt something crack open in her chest, something that had been locked tight since her father died of cholera when she was 15 and her mother had followed him 6 months later, leaving Fiona alone in a world that had little mercy for orphaned young women without resources. "Why would you do this?" she whispered. "You could send word to any of a dozen other women who would come here better suited to frontier life." Warren's expression softened. "Because I read your letters, Fiona Ellis, and I saw a woman of remarkable courage. You have survived circumstances that would have broken someone weaker. You possess intelligence, honesty, and determination. Those qualities matter more to me than whether your dresses fit snugly. But I cannot in good conscience bring you to the ranch in your current state. The work there is too demanding, and I will not risk your health or your life. So I am asking you to let me help you, to give yourself time to heal, and then to decide if you truly want the life I am offering." Fiona reached for her coffee cup to give her shaking hand something to hold. "And if after 2 weeks you change your mind?" "I will not," Warren said simply. "But if you do, I will pay your passage to wherever you wish to go with enough money to establish yourself. You will not be left destitute, regardless of your choice." The offer was more than generous. It was incomprehensible. Fiona had learned to expect nothing from the world except what she could earn through her own labor, and the idea that this rancher, this stranger, would offer her such consideration without demanding anything in return seemed impossible. "I do not understand you," she admitted. Warren smiled for the first time, and the expression transformed his weathered face, revealing a warmth that had been hidden beneath his serious demeanor. "Then we are even, Miss Ellis, because I do not fully understand you either. But I find myself very interested in learning. Now, please, try some of that bread before it cools." Fiona reached for a slice, spread butter across its steaming surface, and took a bite. The bread was indeed magnificent, yeasty and tender, and she ate it slowly while Warren explained details about his ranch. He raised cattle primarily, with a herd of about 200 head, and he also kept horses, chickens, and a large vegetable garden. He employed 2 ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse, men he described as hardworking and respectful. The main house, built by his father, consisted of 4 rooms with a stone fireplace and a solid roof that did not leak even in the heaviest snowstorms. As he spoke, Fiona studied him more carefully. Warren Northwood was not a handsome man in the conventional sense. His nose had been broken at some point and healed slightly crooked, and his hands bore the scars and calluses of hard labor. But there was something solid about him, something trustworthy in the way he met her eyes directly and spoke in that measured, careful tone that suggested he considered his words before releasing them into the world. When they finished eating, Warren walked her upstairs to a room he had already arranged. A simple but clean space with a bed that looked softer than anything Fiona had slept on in years, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and curtains at the window that let in the golden afternoon light. "I will return tomorrow morning at 9 to take you to breakfast," Warren said from the doorway. "Tonight, rest. Sleep as long as you need. Mrs. Patterson will send up a supper tray at 6 and you will eat it even if you do not feel hungry. Do you agree?" Fiona nodded, overwhelmed by the room, the food still warm in her belly, and the strange kindness of this man who had every reason to reject her but had instead chosen to offer her a chance. "Thank you," she managed. I do not know what else to say." "You do not need to say anything else," Warren replied. He tipped his hat to her and left, his boots heavy on the wooden floor, and Fiona sank onto the edge of the bed, her mind spinning. That night, after forcing herself to eat the supper tray of chicken stew and biscuits that Mrs. Patterson delivered, Fiona lay in the soft bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of Helena settling into evening. Through the window, she could hear a piano playing in a distant saloon, the occasional shout or laugh, the clip of horse hooves on packed earth. The air smelled different here than in New York, cleaner somehow, with a hint of pine and mountain coldness even in June. She thought about Warren's offer, turning it over in her mind, examining it for hidden traps or conditions. But no matter how she analyzed it, she could find nothing except straightforward kindness and a practical concern for her well-being. It terrified her more than outright cruelty would have, because kindness meant vulnerability, meant allowing herself to hope, and hope had proven dangerous in her experience. Warren arrived promptly at 9 the next morning, and they walked together to the hotel dining room where he ordered eggs, bacon, pancakes, and fried potatoes for both of them. Fiona ate what she could, her stomach already more receptive to food after the previous day's meals, and Warren talked about the town, pointing out the general store, the church, the schoolhouse, and introducing her to people they encountered on the street. Helena proved to be a town of surprising sophistication, despite its frontier location, with a population of several thousand that included miners, ranchers, merchants, and professionals drawn by the silver boom. The streets bustled with activity, and while some people stared at Fiona's thinness, others greeted Warren warmly and welcomed her with genuine smiles. "You are well liked here," Fiona observed as they walked toward the general store after breakfast. "I pay my debts, treat people fairly, and help my neighbors when they need it," Warren said. "That tends to earn goodwill in a place like this." At the general store, Warren surprised her by purchasing fabric, a new pair of boots in her size, stockings, undergarments, and a ready-made dress that would fit her current frame but could be altered as she gained weight. Fiona protested the expense, but Warren merely shook his head. "You need these things, and I can afford them. My ranch does well, Fiona. I am not a wealthy man by Eastern standards, but I am comfortable, and I do not spend money frivolously. This is an investment in our future if you choose to proceed with our arrangement." The word investment should have sounded cold, but the way Warren said it, with that careful consideration in his voice, made it sound like something else entirely, like a promise. Over the following days, a pattern emerged. Warren arrived each morning to share breakfast with her, then spent an hour or two showing her around Helena or simply talking with her in the hotel sitting room. He asked about her life in New York, and Fiona found herself sharing stories she had thought forgotten. The cramped boarding house where she had lived with 6 other factory girls, the relentless rhythm of the sewing machines, the perpetual exhaustion that had become her normal state. She described the city's chaos, its towering buildings and crowded streets, and Warren listened with an attention that made her feel truly heard for the first time in years. In turn, Warren spoke about the ranch, about growing up in Montana territory before statehood, about his father's determination to build something lasting in the wilderness. He described winters when the snow piled 12 feet high, and they had tunneled paths between buildings, summers when the work of haying stretched from dawn until dark. The simple satisfaction of watching his cattle thrive on the good grassland he had worked hard to maintain. "It is not an easy life," he said on the 4th morning as they sat on the hotel porch watching Helena wake up. "But it is a meaningful one. Every season has its rhythm, its necessary tasks. You work hard, but you see the results of that work. The land provides if you treat it with respect. I think I would like that, Fiona said softly. In the factory, we made garments for wealthy women we would never meet, stitching seams that would never be noticed, producing quantity over quality. There was no satisfaction in it, only survival. Warren turned to look at her, and she met his gaze, noting how the morning sun brought out flecks of gray in his blue eyes. You deserve better than mere survival, Fiona. So do you, she replied. Why have you remained alone for 7 years? Surely there were women in Helena who would have married you. A shadow crossed Warren's face. There was someone, years ago, before my father died. Sarah Brennan, daughter of a merchant family. We courted for 6 months and I thought we would marry. But when my father fell ill and it became clear that I would need to take on the full responsibility of the ranch, Sarah decided she wanted a different life, one with more society and less isolation. She married a banker and moved to Sacramento. I am sorry, Fiona said, and she meant it, recognizing the pain in his voice. I was angry for a long time, Warren admitted. Not at Sarah for making her choice, but at myself for not seeing that we wanted fundamentally different things. I threw myself into the ranch work and the years passed. Then last winter, during a particularly brutal storm when I was snowed in for 3 weeks with only my ranch hands for company, I realized I did not want to grow old alone. But I also knew I could not offer the kind of life that women in Helena seemed to want. So I placed an advertisement, hoping to find someone who would value what I could provide rather than mourning what I could not. And you received my letter, Fiona said. I received 37 letters, Warren corrected, but yours was different. The others talked about seeking adventure or escaping difficult circumstances, which was understandable. But you wrote about wanting to build something, about understanding that meaningful work required sacrifice, and about believing that partnership mattered more than passion. That resonated with me. Fiona felt heat rise in her cheeks. I believed passion was a luxury for people with means. I focused on practical matters. And yet, Warren said quietly, I find myself hoping that we might discover both. The words hung between them, weighted with possibility, and Fiona felt her heart beat faster. Warren reached across the space separating their chairs and offered his hand, palm up, an invitation rather than a demand. Fiona placed her hand in his, feeling the rough calluses and warmth of his skin, and something shifted between them, something that felt like the beginning of trust. As the days continued, Fiona ate the meals Warren insisted upon, and she began to notice changes in her body. Her dresses, which had hung so loosely, began to fit more properly. The sharp angles of her face softened slightly. She had more energy, could walk farther without becoming winded, and the constant gnawing hunger that had been her companion for years finally quieted. But more than the physical changes, Fiona felt something awakening in her spirit. The constant anxiety that had defined her existence in New York began to ease, replaced by a cautious optimism. She found herself laughing at Warren's dry observations about Helena's residence, and she noticed the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled at her. They fell into easy conversation, discovering shared opinions about books, similar senses of humor, and complementary views on life's priorities. On the 10th day, Warren took her on a buggy ride outside of town, heading toward the ranch but stopping several miles short at a high point that overlooked the valley. The view stretched for miles, showing grasslands dotted with cattle, mountains rising in purple magnificence beyond, and a sky so vast and blue that it seemed to dwarf everything beneath it. "This is Montana," Warren said, his voice filled with quiet pride. This is what I am offering you, Fiona. Beauty and hardship in equal measure, work that will tire you to your bones, winters that will test your endurance, but also land that feeds the soul as much as the body. Can you see yourself here? Fiona stood beside him, feeling the wind pull at her bonnet, and she breathed in the clean air, so different from New York's coal smoke and factory stench. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I can. Warren turned to face her fully, and his expression held a vulnerability she had not seen before. I want you to understand something, Fiona. When I said I would feed your body and soul, I meant it as a promise. I see how New York hollowed you out, took everything and gave back so little. I want to be the man who helps you remember what it feels like to thrive, not just survive. But I also want you to understand that this cannot be one-sided. I need you to feed my soul as well, to share this life with me as a true partner. I need to know that you are choosing this freely, not out of desperation. Fiona considered his words carefully, recognizing the importance of this moment. When I left New York, she said slowly, I believed I was choosing the lesser of two evils, trading factory work for frontier hardship because at least the hardship might offer something more. But these past 10 days have taught me differently, Warren. You have shown me kindness without expectation, generosity without conditions, and patience that I have never experienced. I am choosing you not because I have no other options, but because I genuinely want to see what we might build together. Warren's breath released in a long exhale, and he reached for both her hands, holding them gently between his larger, work-roughened palms. Then I have one more question to ask you, and I want you to answer honestly, without concern for politeness or obligation. Ask, Fiona said, her heart pounding. Could you imagine someday loving a man like me? Not immediately, not forced, but eventually as we build this life together. Because I need to tell you, Fiona Ellis, that I am already halfway there with you, and I do not want to bind you to someone whose feelings you cannot imagine reciprocating. The honesty in his words stole Fiona's breath. She looked at Warren's weathered face, at the kindness in his blue eyes, at the strength in his shoulders and the gentleness in his touch, and she felt something bloom in her chest, something warm and fragile and precious. I think, she said carefully, that I am already more than halfway there myself, and that terrifies me more than any frontier hardship could. Warren's face split into a genuine smile, broad and transforming, and he lifted one hand to cup her cheek with a tenderness that made tears spring to Fiona's eyes. Then we will be terrified together, he said, and he leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that tasted of promise and hope and new beginnings. When they returned to Helena that evening, the town was celebrating something, music spilling from the saloons and people gathering in the streets. Warren explained that a group of miners had struck a significant silver vein, and by tradition, their good fortune meant drinks for everyone. He asked if Fiona wanted to join the celebration or return to the hotel, and she surprised herself by choosing to stay. They stood at the edge of the crowd, watching people dance in the street, and Warren kept his arm around her waist, protective but not possessive. Fiona leaned into his solid warmth and felt, for the first time since her parents died, like she belonged somewhere, like she had found home in a person rather than a place. The final 4 days of the 2 weeks passed in a blur of continued meals, longer conversations, and careful planning. Warren brought her to meet his ranch hands, 2 brothers named Jack and Thomas Morrison, who worked for him during the summer months, and seemed genuinely pleased to learn that Warren would finally have a wife. He showed her account books to prove his financial stability, not because she had asked, but because he wanted no secrets between them. Fiona, in turn, shared the few letters she still possessed from her parents, wanting Warren to understand where she came from and who had shaped her. On the 14th day, they married in Helena's small church, with Mrs. Patterson and her husband serving as witnesses and half the town attending out of curiosity and goodwill. Fiona wore the new dress Warren had purchased, altered now to fit her improving figure, and she carried wildflowers that Warren had picked that morning from the meadow near his ranch. The ceremony was simple, the words traditional, but when Warren slipped a gold band onto Fiona's finger and promised to honor and cherish her, she felt the weight of those words settling into her bones like truth. After a celebratory meal at the hotel, Warren helped Fiona into the buggy and drove them toward the ranch through the long summer twilight. The 8 miles passed in comfortable conversation, and when they finally turned down a tree-lined drive, Fiona saw the house Warren had described, a solid log structure with a stone chimney and windows that glowed warmly in the gathering dusk. Warren carried her bag inside, lit lamps, and showed her through rooms that were clean but sparse, clearly the domain of a man living alone. The kitchen held a cast-iron stove, a sturdy table, and shelves lined with provisions. The sitting room offered comfortable chairs facing the stone fireplace. 2 bedrooms opened off the main living space, and Warren gestured to the larger one. "This was my parents' room," he said. "It is yours now, ours, if you are comfortable with that. But if you need time, I can sleep in the other room. I want you to feel safe here, Fiona." Fiona turned to face her new husband, this man who had shown her nothing but consideration and kindness, and she stepped closer to him, placing her hand on his chest and feeling his heart beating steady beneath her palm. "I feel safe with you, Warren. I want to share that room, to share this life fully." The relief in Warren's eyes was palpable, and he bent to kiss her, deeper this time, with a passion that had been carefully banked during their 2 weeks of courtship. Fiona responded, rising on her toes to meet him, and when Warren lifted her in his arms and carried her to the bedroom, she went willingly, ready to begin this new chapter of their shared story. Their wedding night unfolded with a tenderness that surprised Fiona, who had heard only harsh stories about men's expectations and women's duty. Warren touched her with reverence, as if she were something precious, and he paid attention to her responses, adjusting his approach to ensure her comfort. When they finally came together fully as husband and wife, Fiona felt not the pain and disappointment she had been warned about, but rather a sense of completion, of 2 people learning each other's rhythms and choosing to create something beautiful together. Afterward, Warren held her close, her head resting on his chest, and he stroked her hair with gentle fingers. "Are you well?" he asked softly. "I am more than well," Fiona whispered back. "I am happy, truly happy, and I had almost forgotten what that felt like." Warren's arms tightened around her. "Then I will make it my mission to ensure you remember every single day." The months that followed brought both challenges and joys as Fiona learned the rhythms of ranch life. Warren proved to be an excellent teacher, patient when she struggled and generous with his praise when she succeeded. He taught her to manage the chickens, showing her how to collect eggs and watching with amusement when she shrieked the first time a rooster flew at her. He demonstrated the proper way to milk the 2 dairy cows, his hands guiding hers until she developed the necessary technique. He involved her in decisions about the ranch, asking her opinion on which fields to rotate for grazing and whether they should invest in additional breeding stock. Fiona threw herself into the work with determination, and Warren kept his promise about feeding her properly. Every meal was substantial, featuring meat, vegetables from the garden, fresh bread, and dairy products. Warren cooked alongside her initially, teaching her the basics of frontier cooking, and Fiona discovered she enjoyed the creativity of combining ingredients and the satisfaction of providing nourishment for her household. Within 3 months, Fiona's transformation was remarkable. Her dresses required alteration again, this time to accommodate curves instead of angles. Her face filled out, her skin glowed with health, and her auburn hair, no longer brittle from malnutrition, grew thick and lustrous. But more than the physical changes, Fiona's spirit flourished. The haunted wariness that had shadowed her eyes in New York vanished, replaced by confidence and contentment. Warren noticed every change, and he never failed to tell her how beautiful she looked, how proud he was of her adaptability, how grateful he felt to have her beside him. And as the weeks turned to months, the careful affection between them deepened into genuine love, the kind that grows from shared work, mutual respect, and countless small kindnesses. Autumn arrived with brilliant displays of gold and orange in the aspens, and Warren began preparing for winter in earnest. He and the Morrison brothers worked from dawn to dusk cutting and stacking hay, repairing fences and buildings, and laying in supplies. Fiona helped where she could, and she also spent long days preserving vegetables from the garden, canning fruits, and putting up stores that would sustain them through the isolated winter months. One evening in late September, as they sat before the fireplace after a particularly long day, Warren pulled Fiona into his lap and buried his face in her hair. "You have exceeded every hope I had when I placed that advertisement," he said quietly. "You have made this house a home, Fiona. You have made my life complete." Fiona turned to kiss him, pouring all her love into that gesture, and when they moved to their bedroom that night, their lovemaking held a depth of emotion that still amazed her, this intimacy that felt sacred rather than shameful. Winter descended on Montana with the ferocity Warren had warned about, bringing blizzards that piled snow higher than the windows and temperatures that plunged far below zero. But inside the ranch house, warmth and contentment reigned. Warren and Fiona developed their own routines, working together to care for the animals who were housed in the nearby barn, cooking elaborate meals to pass the time, reading aloud to each other in the evenings, and sharing a closeness that the isolation only intensified. During a particularly fierce storm in January, Fiona woke in the middle of the night to find Warren watching her, his expression tender in the dim light from the banked fire. "What is it?" she whispered. "I was just thinking," Warren said, brushing a strand of hair from her face, "about the day you arrived in Helena, so thin and frightened, and how you still held your head high despite everything. I was thinking about how lucky I am that you chose to stay, to build this life with me." Fiona's eyes filled with tears. "I was thinking about how you looked at me that day and saw someone worth investing in, worth cherishing. You saved my life, Warren, in every way that matters." "We saved each other," Warren corrected gently. "I was surviving too, Fiona, just existing rather than truly living. You gave me purpose beyond the ranch, something to care about beyond cattle and crops. You gave me love. And you fed my body and soul just as you promised," Fiona whispered. "You gave me everything I had lost, and more than I ever dreamed of finding." Warren kissed her then, and their love-making that night held an intensity born of deep gratitude and profound connection. Two souls who had found each other against all odds and chosen to create something beautiful from their brokenness. Spring arrived eventually, as it always did, melting the snow and revealing the greening land beneath. Fiona worked beside Warren as they prepared for calving season, and she proved surprisingly adept at assisting with difficult births, her small hands and calm demeanor useful when a calf needed repositioning. Warren watched her handle a particularly challenging delivery one April morning, and his pride was evident in every line of his face. The Morrison brothers returned in May, and Jack commented immediately on the changes in both Warren and Fiona. "You two are lit up from the inside," he said with a knowing grin. "Marriage clearly agrees with you." "It does," Warren agreed, his arm around Fiona's waist, and she leaned into him, marveling at how natural this affection had become, how essential his presence felt to her happiness. In June, exactly 1 year after Fiona's arrival in Helena, she realized she had missed her monthly courses twice and suspected she might be pregnant. The nearest doctor was in town, so Warren hitched up the buggy and drove her to Helena, his excitement barely contained despite his attempts to remain calm until they received confirmation. Dr. Harrison, a competent physician who had settled in Helena 5 years earlier, examined Fiona and confirmed what she had suspected. "You are about 2 months along, Mrs. Northwood. Based on your excellent health now, I see no reason why you should not have a perfectly normal pregnancy and delivery. Continue eating well, do not overexert yourself, and return to see me monthly." In the buggy on the way home, Warren kept one hand on the reins and the other clasping Fiona's, and his joy was so profound that it made her laugh with shared delight. "We are going to be parents," he said, wonder in his voice. "A year ago I was alone, and now I have a wife I love beyond measure and a child on the way. How did I become this fortunate?" "We both did," Fiona said, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "We both took a risk on hope, and look what it has given us." That evening, Warren could not stop touching her, his hands returning again and again to her belly as if he could already feel the life growing there. They made love with exquisite gentleness, and afterward, Warren laid his head on her stomach and spoke to their unborn child, telling their baby about the ranch, about the mountains and the wide sky, about the love that had brought them into being. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Fiona thrived despite the usual discomforts. Warren hovered, protective and attentive, insisting she rest more and taking on tasks she normally handled. The Morrison brothers teased him good-naturedly about his nervous excitement, but they also expressed genuine happiness for the couple, having witnessed the transformation in Warren over the past year. Fiona's body changed again, this time growing round with pregnancy rather than thin with hunger, and Warren never failed to tell her she was beautiful, never made her feel anything less than cherished. He would sit with her in the evenings, his hand on her swelling belly, feeling their child move and kick, and the expression on his face held such wonder that it brought tears to Fiona's eyes. In February, during another Montana winter, but this time with no isolation or loneliness, Fiona went into labor. Warren had already brought Mrs. Patterson out to the ranch the previous week, unwilling to risk Fiona delivering without experienced help, and the older woman took charge with calm efficiency while Warren paced nervously in the next room. The labor lasted 8 hours, long enough to terrify Warren but not unusually prolonged according to Mrs. Patterson. And when their son finally entered the world with a lusty cry, Warren burst into the room, ignoring Mrs. Patterson's protests and dropped to his knees beside the bed where Fiona lay exhausted but radiant. "You did it," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Fiona, you did it. We have a son." Mrs. Patterson cleaned the baby and placed him in Fiona's arms, and the infant, red-faced and squalling, immediately calmed when he felt his mother's heartbeat. He was perfect, healthy and whole, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would likely darken to brown as he grew. Warren touched one tiny fist with a careful finger, and when his son's hand closed around it, tears streamed down his weathered face. "He is strong," Warren said wonderingly. "He is perfect. What shall we name him?" Fiona asked, exhausted but content, her body aching but her heart full beyond measure. Warren looked at his wife and son, and his expression held everything he had never been able to fully express in words. "Daniel," he said finally. "Daniel Warren Northwood. It means God is my judge, and I want him to grow up knowing that kindness and integrity matter more than any earthly measure." "Daniel," Fiona repeated, smiling down at their son. "It is perfect." The months after Daniel's birth brought new rhythms to the ranch. Fiona proved to be a natural mother, patient and attentive, and Warren was a devoted father, returning from his work throughout the day to check on his son and spending every evening holding Daniel, talking to him, singing to him, marveling at every small development. When spring arrived and they could travel again, Warren drove his family to Helena to show off their son, and the town responded with genuine warmth. Mrs. Patterson declared Daniel the finest baby in Montana, and the general store owner presented them with a beautifully carved cradle as a gift. Fiona looked around at these people who had welcomed her, at this town that had become home, and felt overwhelming gratitude for the chain of choices and chances that had brought her here. That evening, as they drove back to the ranch with Daniel sleeping peacefully in his mother's arms, Warren reached over to squeeze Fiona's hand. "Are you happy?" he asked, though the answer was written clearly in every line of her face. "I am more than happy," Fiona said, echoing words she had spoken on their wedding night nearly 2 years ago. "I am blessed beyond anything I could have imagined when I stepped off that stagecoach, so thin and frightened. You kept every promise you made, Warren. You fed my body, my soul, and my spirit. You gave me love, home, purpose, and family. You gave me everything." Warren lifted her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. "You did the same for me, Fiona. You brought light into darkness, warmth into cold, love into loneliness. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." As the buggy rolled toward home through the summer twilight, with their son sleeping peacefully and the ranch waiting ahead, Fiona thought about the journey that had brought her here, about hunger and desperation transformed into abundance and joy. She thought about a rancher's advertisement seeking a practical woman for frontier life, and her desperate response from New York. She thought about Warren's first words to her, asking when she had last eaten, and his promise to feed both her body and soul. He had kept that promise in ways she was still discovering, in every meal lovingly prepared, in every gentle touch, in every word of encouragement and every moment of shared laughter. He had fed her starving body until she bloomed with health, and he had nourished her wounded soul until it healed and grew strong. And in return, she had given him her whole heart, had chosen him not from desperation but from love, and together they had built something beautiful and lasting. The years continued to unfold with the natural rhythm of ranch life, bringing both challenges and triumphs. Daniel grew from infant to toddler, developing his father's steady temperament and his mother's determination. When he was 2 years old, Fiona discovered she was pregnant again, and their daughter, Elizabeth, arrived the following spring, adding her bright spirit to the household. Warren expanded the ranch gradually, increasing the herd and improving the breeding stock, and Fiona proved to be an astute business partner, her suggestions about market timing and resource allocation often proving remarkably sound. They worked together in true partnership, respecting each other's strengths and supporting each other through difficulties. The Morrison brothers continued to work for them each summer, and eventually, Thomas married a woman from Helena and brought her to live in the newly expanded bunkhouse. The ranch became a place of community, with neighbors helping neighbors, and Warren and Fiona's home served as a gathering place for celebrations and support during hardships. When Daniel was 5 and Elizabeth 3, Fiona stood in the kitchen of their expanded home, watching Warren play with their children in the yard, and she marveled at the life they had created. The kitchen, once sparse, now held her mother's china that Warren had somehow tracked down and purchased for her, alongside the practical ironware of ranch life. The walls displayed photographs of their growing family. The shelves held books they read together in the evenings, and preserves they had put up together each fall. Warren came inside eventually, carrying Elizabeth on his shoulders and holding Daniel's hand, and when he saw Fiona standing there, something in her expression made him stop. "What is it?" he asked gently. Fiona crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him, careful of Elizabeth perched above, and buried her face in his chest. "I was just thinking about being grateful," she said, her voice muffled against his shirt. "Grateful that you saw past the thinness to the person underneath. Grateful that you gave me time to heal and chose to love me. Grateful for every single day we have built together." Warren set Elizabeth down and sent both children to play, then pulled Fiona fully into his embrace. "I am the grateful one," he said. "You gave me everything I had given up hoping to find. You made me believe in love again, in partnership, in the possibility of building something meaningful with another person. Every day with you has been a gift, Fiona." They stood together in their kitchen, the afternoon sun streaming through windows that overlooked land they had worked together. And Fiona thought about how far she had come from that desperate young woman on the stagecoach. She thought about how Warren had looked at her that first day and chosen kindness over judgment, patience over rejection. She thought about his promise to feed both her body and soul, and how thoroughly he had kept that promise, day after day, year after year. "I love you," she said simply, because sometimes the simplest words held the deepest truth. "And I love you," Warren replied, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days that follow." Outside, their children played in the Montana sunshine. And inside, two people who had found each other against all odds held each other close, celebrating the love that had transformed them both and created a life richer than either had dreamed possible. The mail-order bride who had arrived too thin, and the rancher who had promised to feed her body and soul, had discovered together that nourishment came in many forms, that love could heal the deepest wounds, and that hope, once rekindled, could sustain a lifetime of happiness. The ranch prospered over the following years, becoming one of the most successful operations in the region. But its true wealth lay not in cattle or land, but in the family that Warren and Fiona continued to build together. They welcomed another son, Matthew, when Elizabeth was 4, completing their family of 5, and their home rang with laughter, occasional arguments, and the constant activity of children growing up surrounded by love and purpose. Warren proved to be the kind of father who taught by example, showing his sons and daughter how to work hard, treat others fairly, and value character over appearance. He made sure his children understood the importance of kindness, often telling them the story of how he and their mother had found each other, how taking a chance on compassion had changed both their lives forever. Fiona raised their children with the same determination that had allowed her to survive New York's factories, but tempered now with the softness that comes from being cherished. She taught Elizabeth to value her own strength, to never let anyone make her feel less than worthy, and she taught her sons to see beyond surface appearances, to recognize a person's true worth. She wanted her children to understand that circumstances did not define a person's value, that everyone deserved dignity and opportunity. As the children grew older, They each developed their own interests and personalities. Daniel inherited his father's love of ranching and spent hours learning everything Warren could teach him about cattle, land management, and sustainable practices. Elizabeth showed an aptitude for numbers and began helping Fiona with the ranch accounts before she turned 10, her quick mind recognizing patterns and opportunities. Matthew, the youngest, proved to be mechanically inclined, fascinated by the new technologies beginning to appear in rural Montana, always tinkering with tools and machinery. Warren and Fiona watched their children develop with pride, but they also made sure to carve out time for themselves, to maintain the intimate connection that had always been the foundation of their marriage. They took evening walks together after the children were in bed, talking about everything and nothing, their hands clasped together just as they had been that day on the hotel porch in Helena so many years ago. One evening, when Fiona was 42 and Warren 49, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in shades of orange and purple. Their children were inside doing homework or reading, the ranch was running smoothly, and everything felt right with the world. "Do you ever think about New York?" Warren asked, his arm around her shoulders. Fiona considered the question carefully. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but not with longing, only with amazement at how different my life could have been. I think about that hungry, desperate young woman who answered your advertisement, and I barely recognize her. She was me, but she was also someone else entirely, someone whose body and spirit were both starving." "And now," Warren prompted. "Now I am nourished in every way that matters," Fiona said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You kept your promise, Warren. You fed my body until it grew strong, and you fed my soul until it learned to trust and love again. You gave me a life I had stopped believing existed." Warren kissed the top of her head. "You did the same for me, my love. You filled my lonely house with warmth and laughter. You made me believe I was capable of being the husband and father I wanted to be. You gave my life meaning beyond work and survival." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky darken and the first stars appear, and Fiona thought about the strange and wonderful path that had led her here. She thought about desperation transformed into hope, about a rancher who had looked at a too thin mail-order bride and chosen to invest in her potential rather than reject her reality. She thought about how love, real love, was not just passion or romance, but also choice, commitment, and the daily decision to nurture and cherish another person. As the years continued to pass, Warren and Fiona grew older together, their hair silvering, their bodies bearing the marks of hard work and time, but their love only deepening. They celebrated each milestone in their children's lives with genuine joy, watching Daniel take over more of the ranch operations, helping Elizabeth pursue her education through correspondence courses that might lead to a career in accounting or business, encouraging Matthew's mechanical innovations that actually improved several ranch processes. When Daniel was 22, he married a young woman named Sarah from a neighboring ranch, and Warren and Fiona welcomed her with open arms, delighted to see their son find the kind of partnership they had shared. The wedding took place on the ranch, with half of Helena attending, and as Fiona watched her son exchange vows with his bride, she squeezed Warren's hand and felt the circle of life continuing, the love they had built expanding to include new generations. Elizabeth eventually moved to Helena to work for a successful accounting firm, becoming one of the first female accountants in Montana. And Warren and Fiona supported her decision completely, proud of her courage and determination. Matthew stayed on the ranch, working alongside his father and brother, his innovations helping to modernize the operation while maintaining the sustainable practices Warren had always valued. Through all these changes, Warren and Fiona remained each other's anchor, the center point around which everything else revolved. They still walked together in the evenings, still talked for hours about everything and nothing, still reached for each other in the night with the same tenderness that had characterized their wedding night nearly 30 years earlier. One summer evening, when Warren was 65 and Fiona 58, they rode out to the high point overlooking the valley, the same spot where Warren had brought her during their 2-week courtship. They dismounted and stood looking out over land that had witnessed their entire married life, and Warren pulled Fiona close against his side. "You remember standing here all those years ago?" he asked. "When I asked if you could see yourself in Montana." "I remember everything about that day," Fiona said. "I remember being so afraid to hope, so certain that something would go wrong. I remember looking out at this view and thinking it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. And I remember you asking if I could imagine loving a man like you. And you said you were already halfway there," Warren recalled, his voice warm with memory. "I was wrong," Fiona said, and when Warren tensed, she turned to look up at him, her eyes bright with love. "I was not halfway there. I was nearly all the way there already, I just did not know it yet. You had already begun feeding my soul, Warren, from that very first meal when you insisted I eat, and told me you wanted to help me. Every word you spoke, every kindness you showed, every moment you treated me with dignity and respect when I had been so long without either, it all nourished something in me that I had thought died with my parents." Warren's eyes glistened with emotion, and he cupped her face in his work-roughened hands, hands that had held her through joy and sorrow, through birth and loss, through every moment of their shared life. "You saved me too, Fiona. I was not starving for food, but I was starving for connection, for love, for purpose beyond mere existence. You fed my soul just as surely as I fed yours. We saved each other." "We did," Fiona agreed, and she kissed him there on the hilltop, with the Montana sky vast above them and the land they loved spread below. And the kiss held 30 years of partnership, of love tested and proven, of promises kept and exceeded. They rode back to the ranch as the sun set, and when they arrived, they found their family gathered on the porch, Daniel and Sarah with their 2 young children, Matthew with his wife and whom he had married the previous year, and Elizabeth who had come from Helena for a visit. The sight of their children and grandchildren waiting for them filled both Warren and Fiona with profound contentment. That evening, they gathered around the expanded dining table, 3 generations sharing a meal together, and Warren looked around at the faces illuminated by lamplight and felt overwhelming gratitude. His eyes met Fiona's across the table, and in that glance passed everything they had built together, every challenge they had overcome, every joy they had shared. After the meal, as the family lingered over coffee and dessert, young Thomas, Daniel's 6-year-old son, climbed into Fiona's lap and asked, "Grandmother, tell us again how you and grandfather met." Fiona looked at Warren, who nodded with a gentle smile, and she began the story their grandchildren never tired of hearing. "I came to Montana on a stagecoach in June of 1882, she said, "and I was so thin that when I stepped down, I thought surely the rancher who had sent for me would send me right back. But your grandfather looked at me and saw not just the thinness, but the person underneath." "And what did he say?" Young Thomas prompted, though he knew the answer. "He said, 'You must be hungry,'" Fiona replied, her voice soft with memory. "And then he took me to the hotel and ordered enough food to feed 3 people, and he told me he would feed my body and soul." "And did he?" the boy asked. Fiona reached across the table to take Warren's hand. "Yes, my darling. He fed me in every way that matters, and he has continued to do so every day since. Your grandfather taught me that love is not just a feeling but a choice, a commitment to nourish and cherish another person, to help them become the best version of themselves. And in return, I fed his soul too, because that is what love does. It nourishes both people. It helps both people grow." Warren lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it, just as he had done countless times over their 30 years together. And the tenderness in that gesture made even the adults at the table feel the depth of what these two people had built together. The evening wound down eventually, with children put to bed and adults retiring to various parts of the expanded ranch house that now accommodated multiple families. Warren and Fiona made their way to their bedroom, the same room they had shared since their wedding night, though updated over the years with new furniture and comforts. As they prepared for bed, moving through the familiar routine they had perfected over decades, Warren paused and turned to Fiona, his expression serious. "I want you to know something," he said. "If I could go back to that day in 1882, knowing everything that would follow, every joy and every challenge, I would not change a single thing. You were the best decision I ever made, Fiona. Choosing you, investing in you, loving you, it was all the best decision of my life." Fiona crossed to him and wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her head on his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. "And you were mine," she said. "You saw me when others looked away. You chose kindness when others chose judgment. You kept every promise you made, and you gave me a life I had stopped believing I deserved." They climbed into bed together, and Warren pulled Fiona close, her back against his chest, his arm around her waist, and they fit together as perfectly as they had for 30 years. Outside, Montana night sounds drifted through the open window, crickets and distant coyotes, the rustle of wind through grass, all the familiar sounds of home. "I love you, Fiona Northwood," Warren whispered into the darkness. "And I love you, Warren Northwood," Fiona replied. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days that follow." They drifted toward sleep in each other's arms, two people who had taken a chance on hope and discovered that sometimes, when you feed someone's body and soul with genuine love and commitment, you create something that transcends circumstance, something that lasts not just a lifetime but echoes through generations. A love story that began with hunger and kindness and grew into something beautiful and lasting and true. The years continued to unfold, bringing the natural changes that time brings to all lives. Warren and Fiona grew older, their steps slower, their hair completely white, but their love remained as strong as ever, perhaps even stronger for having weathered every season together. They watched their children thrive, their grandchildren grow, and eventually welcomed great-grandchildren, the ranch expanding to accommodate multiple generations, all living in harmony on the land Warren and Fiona had built together. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered for a celebration that drew people from across Montana. Friends and neighbors, business associates and fellow ranchers, all came to honor the couple whose love story had become something of a legend in Helena. The mail-order bride who had arrived too thin, and the rancher who had promised to feed her body and soul, and how together they had built an empire of love. During the celebration, Warren stood to address the gathered crowd, his hand clasped firmly in Fiona's, and his voice, though roughened by age, still carried the strength that had always defined him. 50 years ago, he said, I made a promise to a frightened young woman who stepped off a stagecoach looking like a strong wind might blow her away. I promised to feed her body and soul, and I like to think I have kept that promise. But what I did not know then What I have learned over these 50 years is that she has fed me just as thoroughly, just as completely. Fiona Northwood is the best thing that ever happened to me, and I thank God for every day we have shared." Fiona stood beside him, tears streaming down her lined face, and when the applause died down, she spoke as well, her voice clear and strong. "Warren Northwood saw me when I was invisible, valued me when I thought I had no worth, and loved me when I had forgotten how to love myself. He taught me that kindness is not weakness, that gentleness is strength, and that real love is not just passion but commitment, partnership, and the daily choice to nourish another person's spirit as well as their body. He gave me everything, and I have spent 50 years being grateful for that gift." The celebration continued late into the evening, with music and dancing and the kind of joy that comes from community and connection. Warren and Fiona danced together slowly, their bodies remembering rhythms learned over decades, and everyone watching could see the love that still burned bright between them, perhaps dimmed by age but never extinguished, a flame that would burn until the end. When they finally retired that night, exhausted but happy, Warren helped Fiona undress and pulled her close in their bed, and they lay together listening to the sounds of their family settling in the various rooms of the ranch house, the legacy they had created together. "Are you tired?" Warren asked softly. "Exhausted," Fiona admitted, "but happy. So very happy, Warren. Thank you for this life, for this love, for everything you have given me." "Thank you for saying yes," Warren replied. "Thank you for taking a chance on a lonely rancher's advertisement. Thank you for staying when you could have left, for choosing me when you had every reason to choose differently. Thank you for feeding my soul as completely as I fed yours." Warren and Fiona Northwood lived several more years together, each day a celebration of the life they had built, each moment a testament to the power of love to transform, heal, and sustain. When Warren finally passed away at the age of 78, peacefully in his sleep with Fiona beside him, he left behind not just a successful ranch but a legacy of love, integrity, and the understanding that feeding someone's body and soul means seeing their worth, investing in their potential, and choosing every day to nourish the best in them. Fiona lived another 5 years after Warren's death, surrounded by family who cherished her, telling stories of their grandfather and grandmother's love story to children who would carry those lessons forward into their own lives. When she finally joined Warren, passing quietly in the same bed they had shared for 55 years, she did so with a smile on her face, her last words a whisper of his name and an expression of gratitude for the life they had shared. The ranch continued through the generations, managed by Daniel's descendants with the same principles of integrity and sustainability that Warren had established and Fiona had supported.